All right. Welcome to your first lesson in our agronomy unit, distinguishing the differences between monocots and dicots. We're going to talk about leaves and stems today, their anatomy and physiology. I know we went through part of this in our Zoom, but I am going to cover all of it in case you need to go back and fill something in. So with that, an overview of what we are learning today would be the functions of the stem and leaf, or what the function of the stem and leaf are for in a plant, the parts of the stem and leaf and their functions, review of the parts of the flower, and how to tell the difference between monocots and dicots with their leaves, stems, and flowers. So first things first, the stem's main function is to move water, nutrients, and food in the plant. It's like the hallway or the interstate of the plant. It is the moving tool. It also supports the leaves and flowers and keeps the plant upright, if that's one characteristic of the plant, or it helps it crawl along if it's a vining plant. It also stores some food in the plant, not a whole lot. Most of the food storage is done in the roots of the plant, which we'll talk about in our next lesson, but it does store some food. So we're going to look at some anatomy. The vascular bundle has three parts. The first part is the xylem, and the xylem transports water and nutrients. And the xylem is also dead tissue. It is not living. So an example of xylem that you'd find is if you've ever bitten into a stick of celery and you found the celery strings, that's going to be the xylem tissue. It's dead tissue that's filled with cellulose, which you can't really chew very well or digest at all. The phloem transports food, and the phloem is going to transport food downward, okay, into the roots for storage. And the phloem is alive. So is the cambium layer, which is the active growing layer. Cambium layer is only found in something called a dicot, or a broadleaf plant, like a tree or a sunflower, and it allows the stem to grow outward. The epidermis is the single layer of closely packed living cells for protection. This is like the skin. Epidermis would be another term for our skin. Okay, the outside layer of your body is called the epidermis. The plant is covered with a waterproof layer called the cuticle. And this is not to keep water out. This is actually to keep water in. Because if they didn't have a barrier, it would dry out and dehydrate very fast, especially if it's in a hot environment. Some stem anatomy. Again, the pith, storage of water and starch, allows gas exchange and transports substances. And the cortex has similar functions as the pith, with strengthening for the stem and synthesis of food. So the stem on most plants is green, which means it has the capability of performing photosynthesis on the outside. So if we look on the left of it, or of this picture, we have the xylem and phloem and the vascular bundle, and that's for a monocot. And you're going to notice that they're very scattered. There's no pattern really, except for outside there's a ring, and then they're really quite random in the middle. The dicot stem is going to have a very specific pattern. So we see the epidermis and cortex. So that's where we said there could be some photosynthesis happening. Then we see this vascular bundle ring. In a dicot, it's always going to be in a ring. And on the outside is the phloem. Okay, that's it within the cortex. And the inside of that ring is going to be the xylem, lining around the inside ring. That's going to be within the pith. In between those two is the cambium layer, that active growing layer. So how do we identify plants by their stem? We identify them by their meristem, or active growing point on the plant. Monocot's location is in the root crown. It's located underground. Okay. If a plant is cut off, it will grow back. So this is why you cut your lawn, which is a monocot. Grasses are monocots. Every week or so in the summertime because it keeps growing back and getting longer and longer and longer. A dicot, on the other hand, has the location above ground. And if the plant is cut off, it will not grow back. So this is like some flowers in your mom's flower bed. You accidentally cut them off, or you cut them off to put them in a vase. That plant's going to die, or it won't be able to grow usually. In some cases, dicots will move their hormones around and actually make a new meristem at the top if it is cut off, or off to the side if it's cut off. And this often happens when like a soybean field gets hail damage. It can grow back a little bit, or a sunflower field. A wheat field or a cornfield, on the other hand, if it's in the early stages and it gets a lot of hail damage, it will grow back. It will grow back just like it did before. So moving into leaves, the function of the leaf is to produce food for the plant in order for it to grow and produce offspring. So in the leaves, photosynthesis happens, as well as respiration. Photosynthesis happens in the presence of sunlight, and respiration happens in the presence of darkness. So think of it this way. You eat a lot of spaghetti before a basketball game or any sort of physical activity. That's your photosynthesis. And while you're doing that physical activity, that's your respiration. Photosynthesis, like I said, needs sunlight and carbon dioxide, and the product given off is oxygen. And respiration is exactly the opposite. When there is no sunlight, we are using the food, and we are giving off CO2 and taking in oxygen. So respiration happens at night, and photosynthesis happens during the day. So looking at some leaf anatomy, we're going to see a picture in a bit. We have the epidermis, upper and lower, just like the stem, an outside layer of cells that cover the top and bottom. There's a waxy cuticle to prevent water loss. We also have something called mesophyll. That's the main interior part of the leaf where most photosynthesis occurs. That's where the chlorophyll or chloroplasts are. Then we have veins that move substances within the leaf and provide support for the leaf. The veins also move the substances out of the leaf. When food is made and needs to be stored, it's moving through those veins, through the stem, and down into the roots. So the veins actually contain xylem and phloem tissue, because we need phloem to come back when we're performing respiration, taking that food out of storage and being able to use it in the leaves. So this is a diagram of the cross-section of a leaf. It's animated, of course, but we see the upper epidermis, then we see a layer of mesophyll. Right here is a vein, okay, bundle sheath, so that's where we see the xylem and phloem. And we have the lower epidermis and another layer of mesophyll. And then we have guard cells. So leaves have pores, just like your skin has pores, to breathe. And that's where oxygen is let out, okay, and carbon dioxide is let in. So that's like the nose and mouth of the leaf, is where air is let in and out. We also call that the stomata. So how exactly do we use this information? We can identify plants easily and easily determine if a crop is a weed or is a monocot or dicot by leaf structure and venation. Monocots are grasses and dicots are broadleaves. So we're going to use these terms very frequently in both of our Zoom experiments and labs, as well as in the next whole unit of notes. So monocot, grass, dicot, broadleaf. Okay, so this is a diagram. The monocot has parallel veins, okay, and a long, skinny, slender leaf. The dicot has webbed veins or netted veins and wider leaves. So these are pinnate veins. We talked about leaf venation when you were in the 8th grade when we did our nursery landscape unit and you learned how to identify all the trees. A lot of them were or a lot of the plants we covered, almost all of them, if they are a tree, they're a dicot. So they had some sort of webbed veination. Grasses or monocots are the only ones that have truly parallel veins. So here are some basic leaf vein patterns just to review a little bit. We have the parallel of the grasses, the palmately veined, palmately coming from one spot, just like your fingers are coming from one spot on the palm of your hand. It's a great way to remember it. And then pinnately veined. So we have that main vein down the middle and then branching off, little pins branching off. We also can, that went too far, determine if they're monocots or dicots by their flower. So monocots will always have petals or parts in threes. So like a tiger lily actually is a monocot plant or a monocot flower. And it usually has 6 petals. Okay? Dicots, on the other hand, have parts in 4 or 5s. So like a petunia usually has 5 petals, and that's a dicot plant. And we can see 5 petals and 5 leaves. We also can see on here, on the monocot one, 3 petals and 3 leaves. So that's how we tell the difference in the flower. So what about wheat seeds? Wheat and other grasses have green inconspicuous flowers. We can only see the anthers and filaments sticking out. So this would be a picture of a blooming wheat plant. Okay? And we can see these little white projections. Those are the anthers and the filaments. The filaments are making it able for us to see the anthers sticking out of them. Corn, on the other hand, has a different kind of flower. It's monoecious, which means there's male and female flowers separately on the plant. So the tassel of a corn plant is actually the male part of the flower, or the stamen. And that's where you see all the anthers and filaments coming out. The female flower is the corn cob. So that annoying corn silk, when you eat corn on the cob, actually is the stigma and style. And the seed is produced in the cob, which would be the ovary. And each seed has a corn silk to fertilize it. Otherwise, there's no seeds made and we don't get sweet corn. So that's just another version of a monocot flower. They are not bright and flashy like a dicot flower usually is. They're not like bright purple or bright pink. They are green and they are inconspicuous or not easily seen. Here's just another little diagram of monocots versus dicots. We see the floral in parts of 3, parallel leaves and veins. And then this is a new one, new information. Pollen grain has 1 pore or furrow. So mono means 1, and we see that as in 1 pollen grain, or 1 pore of the pollen grain. And then we also see this diagram again of the vascular bundles throughout the stem. They're very scattered. Dicots, again, 4s or 5s for petals, net-like veins in the leaves. Pollen grains have 3 pores or furrows. So di means 2 or multiple, and that's where we see the multiple furrows in the pollen grains. So we'd need a microscope to see that. And then we see the ring shape of vascular bundles. Remember, dicots have cambium layers for the stem to grow outward, and monocots do not. So we're going to practice a little. Obviously, this is a video, so we're going to have to give you the answer right away. But a sunflower is a dicot. Okay, we can see, if I go back, broad leaves, multiple petals, very wide leaves, very sturdy stalk or stem that is growing outward. Next is hard red spring wheat, and this looks very grass-like, okay, which means it's a monocot. It has skinny leaves, skinny stalk, and it has that characteristic head of seeds on top. Soybeans, I guess my font is just a little bit too big. So we see the leaves, they should give that away. Soybeans are dicots, broad leaves, broad netted veined leaves. Alfalfa is going to be a dicot, okay? If we looked at the petals of the flowers very carefully, they have 4 petals, 4 or 5 petals, and the leaves are small, but that doesn't mean that they're not broad leaves. They're, for their size, very wide, and they pan out. Okay. Corn. I gave this one away earlier. Corn is a monocot, a very large version of a monocot. And even in this picture, we can see the veination of the leaves is parallel. Okay, very large veins. The tassels, like we said before, is the male flower on the plant. And there aren't any cobs on here quite yet. They're pretty little that you can't see them in the picture. But definitely a monocot. Okay. So there was an activity to do with this. I didn't get a hold of any celery for you guys. You can try it at home if you want. Cut off half of the inch off the bottom of your celery stalk to expose the stem of it. Add 5 drops of food coloring into half a jar of water. Place cut end of celery into the food coloring solution. Place in the refrigerator. Then I'd have kids write a hypothesis on what you think would happen to the celery stalk overnight and giving a reason why. So tomorrow or the day after, you would analyze your sample and write out a paragraph about what happened and why. Okay? The answer to that is the xylem tissue actually is uptaking water. Okay, that's its job. It uptakes water and nutrients. The phloem's job is to transport nutrients back. Well, there isn't any root function on the living function to the celery stalk after we pick it, so the phloem isn't being functional anymore. But the xylem is still uptaking water, which means it's uptaking the food color dye or food coloring as well, turning your celery xylem the same color as your food coloring. So to review, what 3 parts are included in a vascular bundle? And the answer to that one is xylem, phloem, and cambium layer. What is the purpose of the phloem? The phloem is to transport food synthesized by the photosynthesis in the leaves. So I like to remember this one by the f sound. Phloem, food. What stem function allows you to cut your lawn all summer long? The growing point is below ground in the crown, on monocots only. Okay. What system do you think celery used in the experiment? And it uses the xylem. I just explained that one. The xylem is the dead tissue that's like a straw. It's like a drinking straw for the plant. So that ends our first lesson on plant science. I know you don't have to watch the entire thing to get the rest of your notes, but I am going to start up the next one. Not on this video, you're going to have 2 separate videos, but